Hey there, and welcome to the Fedora Podcast. This is episode 26. I'm Eric, the IT guy Hendricks, and this is the podcast to teach you about how the Fedora community works. We bring you news, interviews, and more. On today's episode, we'll be talking to Carl George, buddy mine here at Red Hat, and we're going to be talking about extra packages for Red Hat Enterprise, or not for Red Hat, I'm sorry. Wow, I got Red Hat on the brain, as you might imagine. So we're going to be talking about extra packages for Enterprise Linux, and yes, it does work on RHEL. Um, so before I say anything else stupid, let me bring on Carl, and he and I can say stupid things together. Carl, so great to see you. So great to connect with you. Really excited to have you on the show.
Howdy, how's it going?
Not too bad. We had an extra day off yesterday, and I used it to go and get burnt to a crisp out on the lake. But it was fantastic. Great time with my kids.
Did you take a boat out there or just playing on the shoreline?
Yeah, boat, tubing, and a lot of snacks and a lot of sun.
Yeah, you look a little red.
Yeah, a
With
little
some
bit.
raccoon eyes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I still feel like I'm burning. So, fun fact: Carl and I actually were part of the same new hire orientation at Red Hat. So that means that Carl and I joined Red Hat at pretty much the same time. And so I think you and I kind of had some communication beforehand, but then ended up and wait, are you? Yeah, and you? Oh, okay, yeah, cool. So Carl and I have known each other for a few years and had the pleasure of connecting at New Hire and most recently at Summit. So really glad that you volunteered to come on the show. Although I'm pretty sure I asked, do you want to? And you're like, yes, I already have the episode planned. So. EPEL is definitely a passion of yours and a huge asset to the enterprise Linux community. So why don't we start out with a little bit about yourself? What's your day job? What do you do with Fedora and the open source community? And then by popular demand, this question has made it back into the interview. What do you do for fun?
All right. Well, like you said, my name's Carl George. I have been at Red Hat about the same time as you. Like you said, December 2019 was whenever I was hired. Someday in there, and you were probably around the same month.
Yep.
For that, I worked at a hosting company here in San Antonio, where I live, for a little while. Before that, I was in the Army, and yeah, I've only had three jobs in my adult life. I tend to stay at jobs for a while. But
That's
while I
awesome
was
to
at
hear.
that hosting company, I started working on EPEL and getting involved in the EPEL community. That was actually my bridge into the Fedora community in general, was trying to figure out how I could get involved with EPEL packages, contribute fixes, things like that. And luckily that made me all the right contacts and eventually got me a job here working at Red Hat. Not initially working on EPEL. Initially, I got hired to work on CentOS Stream, but after doing that for 2 years, I think, someone in my leadership chain asked me, "Well, how would you like to start a team just working on EPEL, like primarily focused on EPEL?" And I said, "Well, yeah, actually, that's what I wanted to do in the first place." So. Um, Started as just a team of one. We've grown to a team of two now, me and my teammate Diego, and we are part of we're a team within a team. So that you might have heard before about the community platform engineering group inside Red Hat. I think it's called team, but I try to call it group to differentiate it from the teams within that group. Uh, Me and Diego are on the EPEL sub team within that wider team. The rest of the team does interesting things like Fedora infrastructure and release engineering. There's other recurrent initiatives that come up. One of the more recent ones was getting the new account system rolled out for Fedora that
Mm.
CentOS also uses. Changes like that will oftentimes fall on the CPE team's, purview to take care of and address.
Gotcha.
Oh yeah, and you asked about myself more, huh?
Yep.
So let's see. So
People
that's work,
people seem to
and
like it
then
when they realize that you actually have a life and do things.
so for personal life, I like staying cool. I was telling Eric earlier that my AC actually went not out completely, but stopped working all the way last night. Called a repairman this morning, and luckily was able to get him out here pretty quickly. Things are cooling off now, so It's definitely needed during the Texas summer. I also, like you mentioned, going out to the lake. I like doing water and lake and river and pool activities as well, especially during the summer days.
Mhm.
During the fall, I like to get out and go deer hunting or bird hunting. Sometimes the most recent hunting trip I got to go up to Oklahoma for goose and duck. That was a lot of fun. And let's see, just try and show my kids things that I'm interested in. I've got both of them using Fedora, and they like playing Minecraft on their little used ThinkPads that I got off of eBay.
Oh,
And
that's perfect.
oh yeah, or take them get them outdoors. Also, I have a little bit of a weird dichotomy of that. I like the outdoors, but I'm also a nerd. So, like, my hunting friends don't really understand like the stuff that I do at all, and sometimes they'll make the mistake of asking, like, "Carl, so what exactly do you do for your job?" And I
Right.
usually push back, and I'm just like, "Computer stuff. You don't want to worry about it." Every once in a while, they'll push back and ask, like, "Well, tell me more. Like, what kind of computer stuff?" And I don't get but, maybe a few sentences in before their eyes start to glaze over, and they're like, "Okay, so this is why you don't, like, wanna talk about it." And I'm like, "No, I love talking about it. I just know that most people aren't gonna comprehend it."
Well, and especially with the nuance of depth that you have with the open source community versus like paid vendor type relationships. I mean, you're in this very, very uh, shall we say, dynamic space in between the community and companies that charge for Linux. Um, but before we get too far into that, why don't we take a step back and let's talk about what EPEL or EPEL, what it is. Obviously, that's short for extra packages for enterprise Linux. So what is it, and why do we need it?
So to explain EPEL, I usually start by explaining a little bit of how Fedora and RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, work together. Um, Fedora is a community distribution. It's sponsored by Red Hat, has a lot of Red Hat engineers involved in it. And but Fedora has way more packages than what would be reasonable to support in the enterprise space. So the last time I looked, I think Fedora was around 60 something thousand packages, and RHEL itself is like 5 or 6 thousand packages.
Hmm.
So it's, don't quote me, but it's like roughly around 10% would be a good rule of thumb for the amount of Fedora that actually makes it into CentOS Stream first and then becomes the next RHEL major version. Um, Everything that doesn't make it into RHEL, basically the stuff that Red Hat doesn't want to support for its customers, um, is eligible to be built in the EPEL project, which it's EPEL is still part of Fedora. It's part of the Fedora project. The branches for EPEL are maintained alongside the Fedora branches. Um, but those packages, instead of being built against the corresponding Fedora release, they're built against actual RHEL, and so they're put in that repo, and then they're available to the community members. So a community member could maintain their own package in Fedora and EPEL. If that package just does end up getting important to Red Hat customers, and Red Hat decides to add it to RHEL, then it would be retired from EPEL. We have a very strict policy of not conflicting with RHEL in any way. It's right there in the name: extra packages only.
I think one of the things to differentiate there is that if there's a package that you get from, say, from the RHEL repository, you can open up a ticket, you can get support on that. But then if it's a tool or a package you get out of EPEL, uh, Red Hat's going to say, sorry, you might look at this resource, but beyond that, we can't really do much for you.
Right. They are community maintained and community supported uh, packages to whatever
Right.
extent of support you'll get from the community.
Right. But I mean, the good news is that a lot of packages that are in RHEL got their start in EPEL and got a lot of community support, got a lot of enterprise usage, and to the point that someone said, we really need this in like the official repositories because this is really important for the benefit and the use of people that install RHEL at say an enterprise.
Absolutely. Yeah, we hear a lot of feedback like about that. With the whole reason my team and my current position exists is because the feedback from customers got loud enough that packages in EPEL, even though they're not supported by Red Hat directly, they're supported indirectly with my team with engineering resources, but not on a you can't open a support case for an EPEL package. Many customers understand that and they're okay with that, but they still need those packages available. They need them to exist for the corresponding EPEL repository for the version of RHEL they're on. And so we would see that come up in feedback from customers about, I can't upgrade, say, from RHEL 7 to RHEL 8 until these EPEL packages are available, or get added to RHEL directly. So it'll block major version upgrades, and customers that get on newer versions of RHEL itself are easier to support. So
Mhm.
we want to remove that as a roadblock for those customers as much as we can.
But one thing I definitely have noticed, because I've been in my current role for a couple of years now, and actually it's right at 2 years now. I believe. I think I started in the rail business unit beginning of July a couple of years ago. Um, but I was a part of our team during the Rail 9 launch, and I was curious if you had any thoughts about EPEL 9 and comparing that to older releases, because it seemed like across the board, between EPEL, between our partners, we were in a position, particularly thanks to CentOS Stream, that we had a lot more packages available for Rel 9 on day one or within a couple of days after.
Yeah, you just summarized it pretty well. That's exactly what we did. I mentioned being a blocker for customers that want to upgrade their major rail, to the next major version of rail, and wanting those packages available. So we got to thinking about it. We had just started the team, and we knew that EPEL 9 is the first thing that we need to work on. How can we do it better than we have before? I don't remember the exact timing, but EPEL 8 didn't really, it sort of launched as like a beta thing, and then it just had a real slow uptake. We didn't really officially launch it and get all the little details sorted out. I think about 6 months in. It
Mhm,
took a long time to get it going. So around the 8.1 release, I think. And because of that, because we didn't officially open it till then, a lot of EPEL maintainers didn't add their packages until then, and that takes time as well.
mhm.
So for a large portion of those packages, customers were looking at maybe RHEL 8.2, 8.3, or even later. Some of those packages still aren't there. We still have requests come in where somebody says the package I want is in EPEL 7, but it's not in EPEL 8 or EPEL 9. Um, so we looked at that for 9 and thought, how can we do this better? And what jumped out at me was just the obvious of start it sooner, open up the floodgates, let the maintainers do their thing. We're not, because we were a 2-person team. There was no way we were just going to build everything ourselves. And even
Well,
if
why
we
not?
did, that would be a short-term band-aid fix. That's not a sustainable, ongoing maintenance approach to it. So we wanted to get it open up as soon as possible. And you mentioned CentOS Stream, because CentOS Stream launched about 6 months before CentOS Stream 9 launched about 6 months before RHEL 9. We started with that as our base to build against. Started building packages, launched EPEL, and just like we were hoping, the maintainers came in droves, and we got lots and lots of packages built. I want to say the final number was like 2,300 or 2,600 packages that we got built, and that the community built, not me, that the community rallied around and got those stood up. And so we were able to launch RHEL with RHEL 9 with thousands of community maintained packages available right on day one, which was a
Mm,
huge improvement over what we'd done in years past.
that's fantastic. I mean, that's exactly what the prediction and the assumption was when CentOS Stream moved between Fedora and Rel. And I mean, even from the enterprise side, working on the Rel team, it is amazing how much support we had day one, and just the sheer number of packages. And I think you were sending me stats like every few days, and it was increasing not by single digits, but by hundreds of packages every few days.
Hmm.
So I mean, it was just an amazing opportunity to see uh, Rel engineers and community developers all working together on this.
Let me see if I can run those numbers again. I do know
Yeah.
that earlier this year, EPEL 9 surpassed EPEL 8 for number of packages available, which was really
Mm.
awesome to see.
And while Carl's pulling that up, sorry, I should have suggested that during the pre-show, but we got talking about air conditioning in Texas summers. But while Carl's looking that up, now's a great time to join us in chat. This is an interactive forum, so if you have any questions for Carl or any questions about EPEL, feel free to throw those into chat. Um, but once you're ready, go ahead and share your screen, and we can, or if you just want to read those out, I can throw those in chat.
Oh, it's nothing worth looking at. It's just a little script that I run that it downloads the repo data and then does
Hmm.
some XML magic on it and gets the total number. It's running right now. We'll wait for that.
So while we're looking at the numbers for 8 and 9, might divert our conversation a little bit, but it sounds like now that you've gotten a major release or two under your belt, especially as the sub team for EPEL as part of the community platform engineering, we'll come up with some really long, obnoxious acronym for your team slash sub team. But in the meantime, it sounds like you've got a proposal for EPEL 10. You really want to not change the direction for EPEL, but really want to change what EPEL does and how you interface with EPEL. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So I mentioned that before EPEL 9, when we first started the team, we started thinking, what can we do differently for EPEL 9 to make it better? And I think we did that. Yeah, I see the link right there. You just dropped the Fedora discussion link in there in the chat, so that'll be great. Um, the So I started thinking ahead to EPEL 10, which is what's next on our radar, right? Rel's on a 3-year major version, rough cadence now. So that means that Rel 8 came out in 2019, Rel 9 came out in 2022. So everyone, it's no promise, but everyone should expect Rel 10 in 2025 based on that 3-year cadence. It's the same reason Rel's also on a 6-month minor version cadence, in case anyone wasn't aware. That's why those things have been getting out more regularly. So I know that we know that in 2025 Rel 10's coming, and I'm guessing that in 2024 CentOS Stream 10 will be available. Just based on the way that the development of the project's going, the way the discussions that have been happening in Fedora ELN, which is a whole nother sidebar that I think I can summarize that fairly quickly. So I mentioned that CentOS is derived from Fedora, and then Rel is derived from CentOS. Fedora ELN is Fedora packages. It doesn't have its own. It doesn't have separate sources, but it is the Fedora Rawhide sources rebuilt with all of the flags that they'll have once they become Rel. So different compiler flags, certain macros defined differently. That's really useful for packagers to find out that the conditional statement they put in their spec file doesn't account for the Rel macro being higher than 9, so they need to adjust it slightly. Things like that. So Fedora ELN, they've been discussing about when they're going to start doing their first composes for CentOS Stream 10, and that's going to start happening this year.
Hmm.
That's not going to be like the launch of CentOS Stream 10, but it is the start of it when they're going to start doing their composes to make sure all the compose tooling works correctly. It's still going to be a sync from Fedora ELN. I believe that the plan is that the Fedora 40 branching point, which we're not there yet. 38 was the most recent release. Fedora 40 is whenever it's going to the development of Stream 10 is going to branch off and going to start getting unique changes. Until then, it's just going to be build pipeline things, making sure that all the builds work correctly and all the composes work correctly, things like that. So we know this is coming up. Everything about 10, and I got to thinking about how we could do things better. We also to talk about that. I also want to talk about another thing we did called EPEL Next. Sorry, all of these things are like interconnected, and it's like everything's a side conversation. So we started EPEL 9 early, but we'd already known before the EPEL team actually got started inside CPE. We started EPEL Next, and what that is, CentOS, now that it leads Rel by about 6 months, when there's a library change coming to Rel, then that happens in CentOS about 6 months early, rather than like a month later when CentOS was downstream of Rel. When CentOS is a month later than Rel downstream, most EPEL maintainers, if there was a library that changed, they just left it broken for about a month and just said, "Okay, well, I'll fix it once the changes in CentOS, and then we'll fix the packages then, and then it'll be fixed for everyone," and just left it broken for Rel users. Now, with it being more than a month, that started getting less tenable. We would see not a lot, but a small handful of EPEL packages that wouldn't install on CentOS Stream 8 because of a library change that was incoming for the next Rel 8 minor version, but hadn't happened yet. It wouldn't for 3, 4, 5, 6 more months. That wasn't really appealing. At the time, I was still on the CentOS Stream team, still inside CPE. But what I wanted was that for an EPEL package not working, I didn't want that to be a blocker for anyone trying out CentOS Stream specifically. So we came up with EPEL Next. It's an extra repo that adds on to EPEL, and it is a build target for maintainers when they have one of those libraries that are different. A good example is Qt and the KDE Plasma. Qt gets rebased occasionally in RHEL, and when that happens, everything that links against Qt, the biggest one being KDE Plasma in EPEL, needs to be rebuilt against the new version of Qt. It's Qt's fairly backwards compatible, but it still needs to be rebuilt to get all the right symbol versions linked to it correctly. Because of that, we couldn't just leave it broken for 6 months. We wanted to do something better, and that's what EPEL Next is. Maintainers can take their EPEL packages that are working on RHEL and not working on CentOS, rebuild them on CentOS, publish a slightly newer release in this EPEL Next repo. RHEL users won't look at it; they just look at the main EPEL repo. But CentOS users would look at both EPEL and EPEL Next, and they would get the higher release and get the compatible build. We knew we couldn't just do it in place, because then if we rebuilt it for the new libraries, and it would start working on CentOS but stop working on RHEL, and we didn't want that either.
Right.
So we have this for just those handful of things. It's usually less than 1% of packages that are affected by this. We had that for maintainers to target and build against. So we started doing that. But what we noticed from that, it was a solution. It worked. It got people compatible packages, and it worked pretty well. It solved the problem for the most part. From a we're bolting this onto the side of EPEL type approach. So we start for 10. I started thinking about how we could do that better. We had a couple of drawbacks with the EPEL Next approach. The first one was that it was kind of confusing for users and maintainers. We had a lot of people think that EPEL Next was a standalone repo by itself, like a replacement for EPEL for CentOS users, and it's not that. You use it with EPEL. It's only got a handful of packages in it at any given time. We also have maintainers confused about when they needed to do EPEL Next builds. For the most part, maintainers could just do their main EPEL build, and it'll work on both RHEL and CentOS. But we saw a lot of maintainers doing builds for both, thinking that they always had to do a build in both, and that wasn't the case either. So we had that confusion, and then another pain point for the maintainers was that whenever something was rebuilt in EPEL Next for a library change, when that same library change happened in RHEL, those maintainers had to do those builds all over again. That's not that big a deal if it's like one or two packages, but like in the case of KDE Plasma, you've got hundreds of packages that need to be rebuilt in a certain order, so that's double a massive amount of work, and that wasn't really appealing. So with that, all of that context, I know that's a lot. Started thinking about how we could do things better for EPEL 10. RHEL itself has minor versions and is developed with minor version branches. And I started thinking about that, and then there's some parallels there between RHEL minor versions and each new version of Fedora. Each new version of Fedora, or rather, the Rawhide branch of Fedora, which is a rolling release that keeps going through time. It doesn't really have a version. It technically sort of has the version of the next version of Fedora. So right now, Fedora Rawhide is, you could say, it reflects Fedora 39 content, even though Fedora 39 doesn't exist yet. At some point, Fedora 39 will branch off of Rawhide, get its last finishing touches put on it, and then it'll be released as Fedora 39. We sort of have something similar in the RHEL development space. CentOS Stream is sort of the Rawhide for RHEL. It's not Rawhide like Fedora's Rawhide, where it's getting breaking changes for the next for a major version, but it's got the changes that are due and appropriate for the next minor version of RHEL. And then, of course, there's Stream 8, Stream 9, and eventually we'll have Stream 10. They're major version branches. So think of it like a major version of Rawhide. So you'll get some changes, but not the big breaking ones that you'll see in a new Fedora release. So that development goes on, like Stream 9 right now. It goes on through time until its end of life date. But the RHEL minor versions, like 9.3 will be the next one. It'll branch off from CentOS Stream 9, get its finishing touches put on it, and then be released as RHEL 9.3. So there's some similarities there with the Fedora workflow in that maintainers can do their work in either in Rawhide or in CentOS Stream, and then stage them for the next release. In Fedora's case, the next major version release. In CentOS Stream's case and RHEL's case, it's staged for the next minor version. I really was envious of that type of workflow because EPEL, for all of its history, only targeted the current minor version of RHEL that was published.
Hmm.
EPEL Next made it where we actually start, even though we didn't really admit it or talk about it at the time, it made it where we were targeting two minor versions of RHEL, like 9.2 and 9.3 that wasn't released yet at the same time. Um, so I thought, well, if we're already targeting multiple minor versions of RHEL, let's just lean into it, because having EPEL and EPEL Next is confusing and has double work. If we just have minor versions of EPEL, maintainers can stage their work, do all of their builds in the leading branch. It'll be compatible with CentOS Stream, CentOS Stream 10. And then whenever the next RHEL 10 minor version happens, they'll have a repo ready to go with all compatible packages. And it's basically going to prove what we've told people, which is that the content in CentOS Stream is what you can expect in the next minor version of RHEL. So we're going to put our money where our mouth is. I mean, we're already doing it a little bit with EPEL Next, but we're really going to lean into it and say the packages built against CentOS Stream 10 for this 6 month period are going to be what you can install on RHEL 10.0 on day one, which is sort of what we did with EPEL 9, but we only did it for the 9.0 release. We didn't do it ongoing for every minor version after that. And that's what we're trying to do now, is actually have a minor version branch for every release of RHEL, following through into EPEL 10. Sorry, that was a nice long-winded answer. Did that answer most of your questions around it?
It does, and
it's a long thing to explain. It
right.
in the discussion thread that you linked, I actually have some markdown charts that I think actually help a lot explaining it. But if you want to see those, I would definitely encourage people to go read that discussion thread and comment with your feedback, or even just give it, a reaction, a thumbs up, or whatever you think
Mhm.
about it. There's already been a lot of good discussion there. There's several things we need to still sort out how it's going to work. Um, one of the big ones that we had a lot of discussion around, kind of a minor detail. We had a few different ways that would have worked, but what we call the dist tag, that is a subset of the release field. Normally for EPEL packages, that's just .el8, .el9.
Mhm.
Similar for RHEL. RHEL packages use the same pattern. Sometimes you'll see RHEL packages that have the minor version there too. You'll see like .el9_1 in some packages. And it's a much longer story to talk about why some RHEL packages have that and some don't. I won't get into that. But for EPEL 10, what I proposed originally was just to lean into that, lean into the minor version thing, and just use EL10_0_1, whatever it is, for every EPEL minor version branch and for every package, just to make it clear which release it was built to target.
Mm.
Um, I think that'll be a lot more sustainable approach than what we've done in the past. There was some discussion around that exact format. We talked about ways we could have most packages be just .el10 and other ones have that, but then there's some sorting problems. There was another solution that was proposed that had there's a special character, a tilde character, that will do some interesting things with RPM sorting, where normally EL10_1 sorts later than EL10 by itself because of the
Mm.
_1,
Mhm.
even if the leading EL10 thing is at was built against the newer minor version. So we had to have some way to make that sort correctly. Um, there was a way to do it by having the minor version ones use a tilde, but unfortunately the tilde is still not really widely understood by a lot of our community members and people like that. I still see questions about it whenever a Fedora package takes advantage of it's a valid character in RPM. It's just not widely known about. So eventually we did a vote within the EPEL steering committee, and we decided not to do the tilde approach and just did underscore minor version for every branch is how we're going to
Mm.
implement it. So little details like that are still being finalized. We're talking about how we're going to structure the release packages. Originally, I thought we were going to have a separate release package for RHEL and a separate one for CentOS. But we're actually experimenting with an approach with DNF variables where we won't actually have to do that. We'll have one EPEL release package like we do now, but we will get rid of the EPEL Next release package, which is what CentOS users need to use currently. So a lot of little fine details that we're still sorting out about how to implement it. That's what we're discussing in those threads on Fedora discussions. Um, but we have lots of time to figure it out. We're probably going to start doing some kind of proof of concept in the staging environment, just to make sure that all the build targets work the way we expect them to, and the branching especially is what I'm wondering if it's going to I want to make sure that it works the way we're expecting it to. But in the end, we're hoping that users don't notice anything and maintainers just have a more comprehensive, understandable approach to building their packages and staging them for the next minor version, and not having to worry about multiple branches quite as much, not having the confusion around the EPEL versus EPEL next branches.
Hmm. That is a glorious and wonderful explanation of this proposal. I
Good. I'm
expect
glad I didn't
nothing
get too
less
rambly.
from. No, I expect nothing less from you, especially when we'll have a conversation on Matrix and I get the occasional response. Can we just chat about this? It's like, all right, let me grab my popcorn. Carl's going to get on a soapbox.
I have a few of those. But rather
um,
than getting on a soapbox, my script did finish running about counting up the EPEL packages. So,
yeah, yeah.
there's a difference between source packages and like source RPMs versus RPMs. The RPMs are what you would install. The source RPMs are what builds. It's like it's the overall package. One way to think of it, you may have one source RPM foo that builds foo and foo devil and foo docs, and so you'd have three RPMs generated from one source RPM. Um, for source RPMs, EPEL 7 has 7,200, EPEL 8 has 4,900, and EPEL 9 has 5,800. So
Wow.
that's from the maintainer's perspective of the packages they're maintaining. It's even more impressive when you look at the actual built RPMs. Um, we've actually had a big influx of Rust packages, thanks to Fabio. I believe I'm saying his name right. He's on the Fedora packaging committee with me. He does a lot of stuff with Rust and Fedora. He's great. Um, he's been bringing a lot of Rust packages to EPEL to support build dependencies for other packages that are trying to be brought there. So on the RPM front, EPEL 7's at 13,000, EPEL 8's at 9,000, and EPEL 9 is at 16,000. So
Wow.
coming up on double the RPMs in EPEL 9 than are in EPEL 8. And it's EPEL 9's already surpassed EPEL 7 on RPMs, just not on the source RPMs yet, the input.
Hmm.
But we'll get there. We'll get there before too long, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, it really kind of confirms what the Fedora community and what the RHEL engineering teams all saw uh, with this move to CentOS Stream. It really, forgive the pun, streamlined the build efforts.
I won't forgive
Uh,
that pun. That was terrible.
it was. But I'm a dad, and I'm entitled to some dad jokes. So,
All
uh,
right. All right. I guess it's forgiven when you phrase it like that.
so you mentioned maintainers and the community a lot. Um, so if there's someone in our audience who's new to EPEL and new to contributing to software, how could someone get involved with some of the packages or with EPEL itself?
So I mentioned that EPEL is part of Fedora, and so the answer to get involved in EPEL is to get involved in Fedora. We'll have that question come up in like our public chats or in Fedora discussions. Someone will ask about, hey, I want to maintain this package in EPEL, and our first question is, are you already in the Fedora packagers group? And if they're not, then we'll kind of not to punt them, but we'll kind of redirect them there. The Fedora Join SIG has some excellent documentation about how to become an active maintainer in Fedora. Um, and so it explains it better than we can. So we will send them over there and tell them, if you have any questions, feel free to ping us. We'll help you through it. But this is the documentation you need to follow. Submit a package for review. You'll find a sponsor. Once you get sponsored, you're in the Fedora Packager group, and then any of the packages you maintain, you can add EPEL branches to them. Or you could also, once you're in the packager group, you can be added to other packages you're interested in co-maintaining. We'll have that sometimes where there's somebody wants to bring a package to say EPEL 9 and it's not there yet. The Fedora maintainer could do it themselves, but sometimes they're not interested in maintaining Fedora branches, that they only use Fedora and they don't want to think about EPEL. Um, but they're not blocking the package being added. They're just not wanting to do the work themselves. So if another packager says, "Hey, I can do this. I can do this for you," aside from them becoming a packager in the first place. But once they are a packager, they can say, if you add me as a co-maintainer, I'll maintain the EPEL branches because I want to use it on RHEL 9 or CentOS Stream 8, whatever it is. And so we've had a lot of maintainer increase with that, where maintainers join the Fedora project because they want to maintain EPEL packages, because they have packages they want to see brought to these newer EPEL branches. They'll get involved that way. They'll become Fedora packagers. If they're adding new packages, then, like I said, they're also a Fedora maintainer. So then they're maintaining their package that they got reviewed in Fedora in across, say Fedora 37, 38, Rawhide later on the new Fedora releases, and they'll add it to as many EPEL branches as they feel like. Maybe they only need it on EPEL 9. Maybe they want to provide it on EPEL 7, 8, and 9, and just provide it in every place possible. It's all just what they're willing to do volunteer wise and what they're willing to maintain and take bug reports for.
So it's not a matter of just getting involved with the EPEL community. It's really getting involved in the Fedora community and then moving into EPEL specifically, if that's where your package would receive the most benefit.
I'd say EPEL will be in that from the maintainer perspective. EPEL would be like a focus area of the Fedora project, not just its own thing. I know that Matthew Miller, he talks about the Fedora project leader. Whenever he's talking about EPEL internally, he tries to always say Fedora EPEL to remind people inside Red Hat that EPEL is part of the Fedora project, that
Hmm.
it's not just this important thing that's off on its own on an island. It's part of Fedora.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons he wants to make sure to reiterate that is that we look at some of the download numbers for EPEL packages versus Fedora packages. And EPEL packages are hugely popular. Fedora is great. A lot of us Red Hatters use it on everywhere we can and advocate for it, talk about it at conferences, all those things. But the usage numbers for RHEL and its ecosystem are much higher, and so EPEL packages are much more widely used than most Fedora branches. So
Hmm.
it's the probably the most popular artifact from the Fedora project. So it's important to not forget that we're part of Fedora. Whenever people say, "Oh yeah, EPEL's great,
Hmm.
I use it everywhere," then you're using something from Fedora.
Right. So as we kind of wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share with people? Any thoughts? Any burning ideas you want to get out into the open?
Hmm. RPMs aren't dead. we see that we see that happen a lot. Conversations about that. About there's new universal packaging formats, Flatpak and Snap and things like that. And I don't personally have anything against those. I don't really use those myself, mainly because I understand RPM really well. Um, I actually just got back from, and I saw you there also, Red Hat Summit. I did an
Mhm.
RPM packaging workshop there. Actually, Eric's boss asked me if I could come and do that workshop with him at Red Hat Summit. So that was fun. So I like RPM a lot. It's very old technology, but it's very mature, and I don't know. It scratches something in my brain that I like. There's nothing. I don't have anything against Flatpaks or Snaps or app images or any of those other things, but I think that there's there's certain advantages to using times you would want to use those, and other times that sticking with the mature RPM technology is a much better approach. Other people can talk about and advocate for, like say Flatpak, but for me, I like helping other people understand how RPM works, just because I've been doing it for a long time, and so the more RPM package maintainers we have, the more people can help share the maintenance burden and maintain what they care about in Fedora directly. And EPEL as well. EPEL doesn't do anything with Flatpaks; it's just RPM packages. So, and I think in a lot of times, um, for Flatpaks at least, I think snaps are a little bit different. But Flatpaks seem to work really well for desktop applications and
Mhm.
not so well for server command line oriented applications. So for a
Right.
lot of things, RPM still a lot better fit, uh, and for like something that like Red Hat Enterprise Linux Server that's targeting server environments, you'd still want to use RPMs there. And even the advocates for Flatpaks, if they wanted to contribute to or change something in the base distribution, they still need to understand that native packaging format. So
Right.
it's still a useful skill. It's not going away, even if some workloads work better as a Flatpak. Not everything will.
So it's funny you mentioned Scott and the summit session you guys did together, because he's going to be doing a we're actually adapting that RPM build workshop into a 30-minute live stream on Friday. So those of you that know me on the from the REL channel, uh, we host a show every Friday afternoon called Into the Terminal, and this coming episode is about building applications using RPM. So, Carl, you'll have to drop by and
First I've heard
give
of
him
it.
hard time in chat. We just had the planning meeting this morning, so.
Who's going to be the willing victim of going through the lab as everyone watches them?
So Scott and Nate are our hosts for Into the Terminal. I've taken a little bit of a step back into just a producer role because trying to get live demos and monitor manage the stream, monitor chat, all that kind of stuff is a little much for one or two people to do. So it's easier to have a couple of people on camera doing the thing, and I'm kind of behind the scenes right now. But you'll have to drop by and throw some flack in chat for Scott.
That sounds fun. So I noticed an interesting comment scroll by.
Yes.
Well, a couple of them I saw. Flat Pack for the win, but RPM's the oldie but goodie. Oh yeah, you just posted up there on the screen. Edward had a question about. He saw that whenever Red Hat decided to drop KDE, which I believe that was in RHEL 7, or it might have been RHEL 8.
I think it was.
RHEL 8. I believe KDE is in RHEL 7, and in RHEL 8, Red Hat decided like we're not maintaining two desktops. We're just going to maintain GNOME by itself. But because EPEL is extra packages, it was very quickly added to EPEL 8, and it's maintained there. That there is an EPEL packager SIG. We talk a lot about what EPEL actually is as far as the people working on it, and we've gone back and forth between is EPEL a SIG, is EPEL is it an initiative, it's not really a spin of Fedora. There's also what's the other term? Working group is another entity within Fedora that it could be. And we're kind of a weird hybrid. We don't really fit into any of the existing buckets. What I tend to lean towards is I say it's an ongoing initiative, not as opposed. Most of the initiatives are short term, so initiative doesn't even work perfectly either. But I would say it's an ongoing initiative. We also have a SIG that is that's not the EPEL. That's different from the EPEL team within CPE. That's also different from the EPEL packaging. The EPEL steering committee, where we talk about like policy stuff around EPEL and how that works. Things like not replacing RHEL packages. So the EPEL SIG, that is people that want to help each other with EPEL packages and their dependencies. Some of those KDE dependencies are maintained by the EPEL SIG, but there's also a KDE SIG in Fedora, and that's where most of the maintenance actually happens. They take care of KDE in Fedora and in EPEL.
Yeah, a lot of nuance and a little bit of a discussion going on in chat about Flatpak versus RPM, but
yeah, it seems to be a hot button issue. So when you asked me about burning things I wanted to get off my chest, I was like, yeah, well, here's a good one. Everyone likes discussing this. I know that it's come up recently in the news too. There was a mailing list post that's got into the Linux news circuit around LibreOffice, and what I've told people about that is that RHEL deprecates packages all the time. If you look at the RHEL release notes, usually every minor version something is deprecated where it's decided, we're going to keep the lights on for this and maintain it for the versions of RHEL that it still is in, but we're going to remove it from a future version of RHEL. Not always the next major version of RHEL. Sometimes it hangs around for a couple of releases, but definitely at some point in the future, people should plan for it not to be there. And that's what happened. The Red Hat desktop team indicated on the Fedora mailing list that they don't want to maintain LibreOffice in RHEL 10, and so because of that, they're going to pull back their participation in maintaining the LibreOffice RPMs in Fedora itself. For RHEL in the future, they're expecting that the LibreOffice Flatpak is good enough, and if people want to use that, they can. And like I said, Flatpak works fine for desktop applications. But they withdrew from the Fedora packages, which is LibreOffice is a big name in this space, but this actual event happening is not uncommon. It's pretty regular. Something gets deprecated. The RHEL maintain. I mentioned that RHEL is only like roughly 10% of the Fedora RPMs actually make it into RHEL. So there's a huge amount of RPMs that are just community maintained in Fedora. And so when rel maintainers withdraw from a Fedora package, then those are up. They become what's called an orphan. Other Fedora maintainers can adopt them. Sometimes existing co-maintainers of the package that aren't working on rel can just keep those packages going and just take over maintenance of them directly. Um, and even sometimes it happens where the rel maintainers decide that even though it's not part of their job anymore, they may still want to keep maintaining that package in Fedora just on a volunteer basis because maybe they've been in that upstream community for a long time and they still
Mhm.
want it to work correctly on Fedora. So they'll take it from being their day job to their side project.
Yep.
Those sort of things happen regularly. It's a bit of a non-event. Yes, LibreOffice is a big deal and a big name that people recognize, but stuff gets deprecated all the time. Maintainers change, and that happens in Fedora itself too. Aside from any kind of Red Hat business decisions, a maintainer may get busy with life. They
Mhm.
may not have time for Fedora anymore. They may have a kid. They may get a new job that takes up all of their time. All kinds of things happen. We have processes in place for that where if there's some kind of critical thing, there's a group called proven packagers in Fedora that can step in and fix things in a package, like get a CVE backported or update to a new version that fixes a CVE. So we have some crossover there. Those aren't the primary maintainers of the package. So long term, what ends up happening will, like the orphan process, the package will get orphaned. A new maintainer will say, "Hey, I'll take that. I can
Mhm.
take care of that package. I want to make sure it stays around." Um, if nobody adopts the orphan package, then after, I believe, 6 weeks, it gets retired from Fedora Rawhide. It stays in current Fedora releases and current EPEL releases, just until those go end of life. So that happens sometimes where we'll have like an EPEL package that the maintainers have withdrawn from. It may be orphaned. It may even be retired completely from Fedora. But we try to keep it building and keep it secure as well as we can. Um, I say we. I guess the context for that we would be the overall everyone participating in EPEL, not just the EPEL team and CPE. Although we do look at those things, or the EPEL steering committee, where we also talk about those things. There's a lot of we in different contexts. The wearing many hats thing.
For sure. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of our agenda. But I can attest that Carl's very active out on Mastodon, out on the Fedora's discussions page, and a lot of those different special interest groups. So if you have questions or if you want to get involved, Carl's always available. And the Fedora team is amazing at bringing in new maintainers and helping young developers get started with something like Fedora packages. So there's plenty of links that we pulled together for this episode. If you're watching us live, give me about 30 minutes or so. I'll get the episode, or I'll get the show notes taken care of. If you're watching this after the fact, we should have all the links and everything ready to go for you, as well as chapter markers. So definitely check that out. So Carl, I really, really want to thank you for joining us today. It was great catching up with you and great
Oh, one
chatting
more
about.
one more thing I forgot about.
Sure.
Tying up the thread about LibreOffice. Um,
Mm.
if everything goes through, like I'm not making any kind of product promises for rel itself, but the expectation that the rel workstation team talked about on the Fedora mailing list was that rel 10 is not going to have LibreOffice. If that's what comes to pass, then anyone that wants to maintain the LibreOffice maintainers in Fedora can branch that for EPEL 10 and maintain it there as RPMs. So
Mhm.
um, that just gets back to the extra part, the community part. Red Hat product decisions, other than not overlapping it, staying true to that extra part, doesn't really affect what's in EPEL. As long as it's not in rel and conflicting, we can put whatever we want in EPEL that follows the package guidelines. That's free software.
Right. And and I was not directly involved, but I was made aware of the change earlier on, and I mean honestly, I don't want to say it's a non-event, but I mean, LibreOffice is supported by, is it the Open Document Foundation? There's so many foundations now, I can't keep them all straight, as well as an amazing community in Fedora and EPEL. So the idea that Red Hat desktop team doesn't have the resources to maintain LibreOffice is only half the story. The other half was that even in the Fedora developed mailing list, it was pointed out that the Red Hat desktop engineering team is very, very much focused on finishing this move to Wayland, trying to get some of the functionality, trying to get some of the feature parity,
Yeah,
so that
I saw
X11 can
HDR support
finally.
called out specifically.
Right, exactly. So trying to get those things fixed and working in Wayland so that X11, which is now like 300 years old, can finally be completely retired, and we don't have to maintain both those build structures. So that's what RHEL engineering is focused on. So why not let someone who's paid to do that focus on fixing those issues, and then taking a well-maintained and well-supported project like LibreOffice and entrusting the community to manage that. Um, Luckily, I don't think that particular story was too terribly blown out of proportion. I know I saw some less than friendly comments out on social media and Reddit about that, but it was a lot less than I was anticipating. But I think a lot of folks actually took time to read that thread and realize that there's a lot of things that need to be knocked out on the desktop. And unfortunately, Red Hat only has so many engineering cycles, and the power of the community is so much greater than what a small desktop engineering team can manage. So I felt like it long term it's going to be a good move for the community, and I would not be the least bit surprised if LibreOffice was available in EPEL 10.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed a lot with community discussions is that nuance is hard, and
Hmm.
uh, you may want to go into a long, detailed, nuanced take about how this thing is this way, and then everyone else gets a bumper sticker slogan of, "Oh, well, this thing is terrible, this thing is that," and that's what gets traction, not the long, detailed, nuanced take that takes in all the factors. Um, Ask me how I know about this after working on the CentOS Stream team.
Yeah, we both went through that transition. But before Carl has a chance to get me to say something stupid that I'll regret, I think we'll wrap this episode. And so, quick announcement around the next episode. It's up in the air right now. I know this is ridiculous. I just started working on the podcast, but I'm going to take a step back for just a couple of months. Summer has proved to be very, very insane. So between kids being home and work life balance and very busy season at work, I'm going to be taking a bit of a pause. I'm not going to say that the podcast is going to take a pause because I've been in conversations with a few folks that want to host. So this is your chance if you want to be part of the Fedora Podcast. Join us join us in the Matrix channel, and let us know what kind of setup you have. Let us know if you've got any materials we can listen to, and we'll try and get you set up with a topic and a guest, and keep the podcast going. But as for me, I need to take a step back for my own sanity a little bit. In fact, this isn't the only sacrifice. There's some D&D campaigns where particular gunslinger or wizard won't be participating for a couple of months, but it's not the end for sure. But just know that I plan to be back this fall when things settle down, namely when my kids are back in school. Shh, don't tell them. But so Carl, if you want to host, by all means, I'll set you up.
I think I'm going to pass on that, but I'd be open to being a guest again in the future.
For sure. Yeah, you've been on Rel Presents. You and I've collaborated on a few other things, so always a pleasure to talk with you. So, on behalf of my guest Carl George and the entire Fedora podcast, the entire Fedora community, thank you all for joining us, whether live or deferred. Make sure to ask any questions in the comments below. We try and answer those as quickly as possible. And stay tuned to this YouTube channel as well as social media, Mastodon, Twitter, all the things to see when the next episode will get scheduled. Hopefully, it won't be too much of a break. But anyway, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon.
Take care.